Well, hello friends. Welcome to the SerenityOS update for July 2022. It's been a nice month in the project, and I've got a whole bunch of things to show you today, so let's just get right into it. So the first thing I want to show you today is actually not on Serenity, but here in Linux. So this is the Ladybird web browser, which is a GUI for Serenity's LibWeb engine, but it's running on Linux. And until now, we've only been able to run our browser engine on Serenity itself, but thanks to the hard work of Dex and a bunch of other people, but especially Dex, we are now up and running on multiple platforms. So this is super cool. Basically, it means that you can now develop and test the browser engine on platform of your choice, as long as we can port Ladybird to it. And we've already seen people porting it to macOS, FreeBSD, Haiku, even Windows and Android. And it's just been really fun seeing people getting it up and running on their favorite platforms. So I think this is going to be tremendous because now there's a way for people who are perhaps interested in browser development, but don't want to work on a full operating system. Now there's a way for them to work on our browser engine separately. So I don't know, it's just very exciting. And I've been using this myself as a debugging tool this month while working on various websites. And it's pretty handy. It's still missing a lot of the debugging and inspection functionality that we have in Serenity, but we'll add more over time. I don't know why this does not load. Apparently it crashes. Yeah, well, it's a little bit unstable, but it does work for the most part. Yeah, this is really cool, I think. And I'm excited to see what we can do with this. And the browser itself is open source on GitHub. It's currently in a separate repository, but I think we'll probably end up moving it into the Serenity repository at some point. But it's still early days. We're figuring things out. But if you want to check it out, build it on your machine, here's where you can get it. So that's Ladybird. Now we are going to visit JT, who's going to talk about the Jakt programming language.
Well, hello friends, it's me JT. We are doing a bit of an update this month on Jakt. It has been a huge month for Jakt this month. So much that I'm just going to try to break it into parts in terms of kind of what happened in different parts of the month. So in the first half of the month, that's where we're still under feature freeze. So let's talk about that for a second. We went under a feature freeze because there's so much excitement to put a bunch of features into the language. And we saw that if we kept going with the Rust-based compiler, everyone would want to dump all their new features into the Rust-based compiler. And that would mean that much more work that we would have to do in order to get the self-host compiler working. What we decided to do, and I can't remember when this started, I think last month, or maybe even before then. I'm a little fuzzy when we started the feature freeze, but we knew that we had to kind of stop putting new features into the Rust-based compiler so that we could just get the self-host compiler working. The self-host compiler being the one that is the Jakt compiler written in Jakt itself. So we put that feature freeze in, and the goal of the feature freeze obviously was to kind of slow us down and get the self-host compiler up and running. But the way that we knew that we had hit what we needed to do was that the self-host compiler needed to be able to run all of the unit tests correctly, so they would all pass. The first half of this month, laser focused on getting the test running and passing on the self-host compiler. That was our big goal. If we could get all the tests passing on the self-host compiler, if we'd let go of the feature freeze, let people add new features, of course, encourage them to put them into the self-host compiler, because we knew if we could get all the tests passing, it had a good chance of being a real compiler. Like it wasn't just an example or an experiment anymore. It was the real deal. So yeah, first half of the month, laser focused. And by halfway through, around, I don't remember the exact date, like the 17th or the 18th, somewhere around there, we were actually able to pass all of the unit tests of the original Rust-based compiler in the new self-host compiler. Once that was going and passing all the tests, we pull the feature freeze out and let people go to it. So I'll be talking about some of the new features as well. But before then, before we talk about new features, there's actually even more to talk about. And one of those is that we did not stop there with the self-host compiler. Just passing unit tests was great, but we knew our end goal was to have the self-host compiler be the main compiler. If we could get there, have the self-host compiler be the only compiler, that would be amazing, right? So our goal first was get all the tests working in the self-host compiler. Check, did that. Halfway through the month, we're done. The next goal after that was, can we get all of those unit tests, after we got all those unit tests working, can we get the self-host compiler building itself? If we could, now we're a big way towards actually being able to run and work with just the self-host compiler. So in the second half of the month, we did the unit test, then we got the self-host compiler building itself, and then, as I'll show you here in a second, we drive all of the IDE work off of the self-host compiler. So let's take a quick look at that. In the window that you see below me, I am looking at the self-host compiler in its current form. Now this is a fully fleshed out, fully formed compiler now. We've got all the pieces that you would expect. In fact, if you've seen the Rust-based compiler, this is almost a mirror image of that. We've got the ID support and the lexer and the main. If I hover over things, I get their particular type. If I do something like args parser dot, I get the completions. I get errors if I type something wrong, and then I can hover over the error and see what I got wrong, and so on and so on. So it works just as you would expect. And again, all this ID support as of today is now driving completely off of the self-host compiler. You might ask, okay, now what? We've got the self-host compiler doing all the tests, passing all the tests. It has all of the capability of building itself, and to be able to drive the IDE, do we even need the Rust-based compiler anymore? And the eagle-eyed of you will notice it is not there. So there used to be a SRC, source directory, and that's gone. So if you check out Jakt today, what you'll get will be a compiler that is completely written in Jakt and has nothing else there. Now there is one little thing there that actually will build the first pass of the Jakt compiler, this thing called the stage 0 compiler. It's a rather gnarly looking C++ file that I don't really recommend that you read, but it's there. And this is the C++ that's generated by the Jakt compiler. As the Jakt compiler does, its job is to take Jakt, output C++. So we have a snapshot of a recent compilation of Jakt as C++. So this allows you to take this project, build it on any platform that has C++ support, and assuming it supports modern C++, you can then take this, what's called bootstrap, that is, take this version of the compiler, compile it, and then compile Jakt with it. Once you do, you'll have the same artifacts that everyone else will use, which is the Jakt compiler. So it's already to the point where it is completely written in itself, all the IDs in itself, and we are using it as the only compiler. All right, so that was the big thing this month, complete self-hosting. So we finished that, which is an enormous check mark in our to-do list of things to do. Now, I mentioned earlier that we're unfrozen. At this point, people can be adding new features. We have been a little slow in terms of, it's not going to be open the floodgates and let everyone send in all their pull requests for all the new features. We know that there's some gaps. We could definitely feel the gaps when we're implementing, the compiler in itself. You can see, there's definitely a missing spot where, closure functions. There's no closure functions. This is kind of cumbersome, as one example. We knew that there are some gaps like that. We knew that not having references. These are things that were kind of annoying to us. So those are the first ones that we started to fix. So let's look at some of these new features that came in this month after the feature freeze. The first one, actually, I was just talking about is references. So if I look for references, you'll see that there are, here we go, no references, simple references. There's some examples that have errors on purpose because we want to make sure that we can catch errors with them. But here's one example of just of the new references here at the top. You can see the ampersand that says I take in a reference, and then the ampersand mute. So you can see this is very much inspired from the Rust syntax of saying that's a mutable reference. So we can use that to, as you can see, update the result with the values from A and B with the dereference operator. So this is going to give us the ability to be able to pass in even large structures, large values into functions, and not have to copy the whole thing in. It also allows us to kind of have in-out parameters, things that get passed in with the intention of being mutated, like result in this example. Okay, so that is references. There's more that we want to do with references in terms of their safety and making sure that everything about them doesn't violate any of the kind of safety guarantees that we want Jakt to have. We'll get there. That's not there yet. Just the references part is there so far. All right, so references and mutable references. And the other one I did mention was around closures. So let's look at those real quick. So here's an example of closures here at the bottom. A first class function sometimes gets called. The ability to pass in a function as a parameter. You'll see this one says, I take in a function that, when passed an I64 gets out a Boolean, and then we pass in that function over here. So yeah, this is a very recent addition the last few days. This will continue to iterate, we'll continue to refine it. But this is an important piece of, if we want a safe systems language, we're going to want things like this in order to make an API that's nicer to use in a safe context. So this is really awesome to see this addition already, and I'm sure we'll continue to refine it as we go. We have another thing called guards. Let me show you this real quick. So guards are a way of making sure that a particular condition has been met before continuing on in the body of the call. So here we say guard of, this thing has to be an even number, right? The modulus of I equals 0. If it's not, then continue on, right? We're going to ignore it. And same thing here. Now, if we wanted to do this without guards, we would end up nesting some conditions, or the kind of what Andreas calls rightward drift. We would have some of that. But guard allows us to kind of keep more on the left side. Another thing that it does is that if we start adding more static analysis to the language, we'll be able to use the guards to say, well, we know past this statement, the guard has been met. So if we checked for null, or we checked for, not that we have nulls, but we might in unsafe code, we check for a particular condition, we know that after that point, that condition is like satisfied. So this would be really nice in the future as we add more safety guarantees. We'll be able to use that in some of the analysis of those safety guarantees. So yeah, there are more features coming, no doubt. But it's amazing that we're at the point now where we have not only some really cool new features, but of course the self-host compiler now being our main and only compiler in the system. And everything will just kind of be built on top of what we've already done. I'm super excited to see what people will do with the language. I'm already starting to see people build projects with Jakt and take it and use it beyond just the compiler itself, which is amazing. I always love seeing that. And yeah, I hope to see you all on the Discord or in the comments. And thank you.
So here we are on the July edition of the SerenityOS desktop, and I've got a whole bunch of things to show you today. So let's start with network settings, which is a new settings window, and you have to run it as root at the moment, unfortunately, but that's something we can fix. So this application was added by Mache, and it's essentially a configuration tool for network adapters. So at the moment, we have these two adapters. As you can see, only one of them is enabled, and it's configured to use DHCP. If we wanted to, we could just uncheck that and, you know, put in some cool address and gateway and set up our network differently. And this is now, instead of having to edit text files, we have a GUI tool for that. Very cool, I think. And I don't know, I really like it. I especially like this way that you input the net mask here as a size rather than like as a 255, 255, and so on text box. That's pretty cool. Anyway, speaking of networking, we also saw a really nice fix this month for DNS queries. So we used to have this bug where if the first name server would fail to respond, then we would just not try to contact secondary name servers. And this was fixed by Idan. So now we actually fall back to multiple name servers if the first one fails. So hopefully that should make our DNS queries a bit more robust. Thank you, Idan, for doing that. Something else that I find really neato is the file manager now creates a new process group when you launch a process. So if I launch calculator from here, for example, this now runs in its own process group, which means that if I close file manager, the calculator stays open, which is definitely what you want in 100% of cases, I would think. So this was fixed by Lucas, and I don't know how we lived for this long without it, but thank you, Lucas, for fixing that. And what else? So the little workspace picker down here where you choose the current workspace saw a nice little change this month where if you don't like workspaces and you make it so that you only have one of them, then it now disappears instead of taking up space in your system tray. So this was done by Philip. So thank you, Philip, for doing that. I think nice little thing, give people a bit more space if they don't want to have multiple workspaces. A random thing that I did, by the way, I don't know why I'm thinking of that right now, but these radio buttons right here, these used to be bitmaps. And this month I went and I wrote the code to draw them pixel by pixel instead. So just programmatically rendered radio buttons. And the advantage of this is that now if you switch to a different theme, you actually get like theme respecting radio buttons. Whereas previously we would just slap the same bitmap, no matter which theme you had, you would see the same radio button bitmap. Now we give you a theme honoring radio buttons. So I'm happy with that change. I don't know why. Again, I don't know why that took so long, but don't want to go back now. So this month I did a video about a new pledge utility, which was inspired by a blog post by Justine Tunney. And the pledge utility basically allows you to specify a set of pledges with which to execute an application. So if you're not familiar, we have implemented the pledge sandboxing mechanism that was originally invented by OpenBSD, where you can specify a set of sort of promises, which are capabilities that you tell the kernel what type of activities you're gonna do as a process, and if you do anything else on that, then the kernel will shut you down. So a very, very small set of privileges would be something like std.io and rpath, which means that you can do basic I/O and you can do file system reading. And this should be enough to run an application like binid, which it is because it doesn't fail. But notice what happens if I don't pledge rpath, then it crashes because indeed we have now pledged rpath. So I don't know, just a neat little utility. Like, we've had the pledge mechanism forever, but Justine, in her blog post, she had this little utility, and I thought that's so neat. We should have that too. And then originally, when I implemented the utility, you had to sort of do this dance to get through the dynamic linker, but then Itamar did a nice patch where he added the -d thing, which just makes it play nice with the dynamic linker. So basically, we pledge whatever promises are needed plus whatever the dynamic linker needs, and then we do a special handshake with the dynamic linker so that it then revokes whatever additional promises before entering the dynamically linked executable. So thank you, Itamar, for doing that, because previously you had to include like prot exec here as well, which looked really janky, and now you don't have to, just to appease the dynamic linker. Anyway, I think this is really nifty, and it's a cool way to test out like, oh, could this program actually execute with a smaller set of pledges than it currently does? Well, you can run this on anything, right? You can run this on our programs, but also on ports to find out, do these ports actually need this functionality? And as Justine mentioned in the blog post, which I will link in the description, by the way, this is kind of cool for a use case where, say that you download something and you don't quite trust it, like a piece of code, and this gives you a way to run that piece of code, but taking away its ability to connect to the internet, for example, because if you don't pass inet here, then this executable cannot open IP sockets. So I don't know, I thought that was super neat. Anyway, enough about that. So in Pixel Paint, I don't know if we had any big Pixel Paint changes this month, but we can use it to demonstrate something, which I'll just draw something doodlish there. So Karol went and improved our PNG encoder once again. And I guess that was not a very graphical demo in itself, but the PNG encoder now also does filtering. So previously, I think last month, Karol added zlib compression to our PNG output, which we previously didn't do. So we used to encode huge PNGs. Last month, Karol added compression, so we were now compress our PNGs. And this month, Karol also added PNG filtering. And it's implemented in kind of a funny way, because the PNG format allows you to filter each scan line in 1 out of 5 ways. And every scan line can have 1 out of those 5 filters. And then you're sort of, I guess the optimal strategy is to just brute force, try all the filters, see which one produces the smallest result for the current scan line, use that, move on to the next scan line. So that's what we do. We just run all the filters, all the 5 filters on every scan line, choose the one that compressed the best, and as a result, we now produce even smaller PNGs. So that's really awesome. I think there are some ways to improve the heuristic further, but the fact that we can now produce like an 82K file for a 510 by 356 bitmap is pretty sweet. In the past, in the long ago, that would have been 510 times 356 times 4. Wait, that doesn't seem right. 510 times 356 times 4. What on earth is going on here? 356 equals times 4? I think this calculator needs a little work. All right. Anyways, we're finding bugs. It wouldn't be the monthly update if we didn't find at least one bug. So that goes on the to-do stack for calculator. Anyway, let's look at something else. So Text Editor saw some nice stuff this month. Let's open that up. So Fubarbaz this month, we gained the ability to move lines up and down in a way that is undoable. So we had this feature since a while ago, but it was not compatible with the undo stack. So I think it was actually, if you would use the feature, you would just totally screw up the undo stack. But now Lucas and Joropo did some work on just this feature of moving line up and down. I don't know if it's in the, I don't know if the action itself is here, but you can see that the undo stack now knows about moving the lines up and down, which is really nice because it's actually a feature I use all the time when editing. And it was kind of weird that it was not working with undo and redo. Another cool feature, which also works with undo and redo. Wait a minute, what's going on here? Okay. Which also works with undo and redo is if you have a selection and you press tab, we will now indent the selection. You can also unindent with shift tab. And you can also undo and redo those actions. Very, very cool. And this was implemented by Hutton. So thank you very much, Hutton, for doing that. I think that's an excellent feature for editing code. Like when you have some, some C++ that you're editing, it's nice to be able to just select and indent without having to be super precise about where you put the cursor, like as long as it's spanning the lines that you want to indent. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. All right. What else do we have in user space? So we have a new application for partitions. Yes. So let me show you Partition Editor. This is a new app that is built by Samuel. And Samuel took the partition code we had in the kernel that parses the disk partition table and converted it into a library called libpartition that can then be used both by user space and the kernel to share the functionality and for parsing partitions because it's useful in both places. And you can see here, I've pointed it at a secondary hard drive I have configured, and you can see the current partition table on that drive. Now, the application is really bare bones. I can't do anything but inspect the partition table at this time, but obviously this is something that we can expand on. So shout outs to Samuel for taking the initiative and starting on a partition editor. I think it's going to be a very good to have application. And it's just nice to see new apps on the system. That looks kind of nice. Anyway, speaking of disk storage, I think in the kernel space this month, Liav has been doing a bunch of stuff. For example, adding the sysdevices storage directory where you can see the current storage devices that the kernel knows about. So you entered the directory by, what are these called? LUNs, like logical unit numbers or something like that. And you can learn a little bit about the device that it's attached here, like what kind of command set do you use to speak to it. This is an ATA drive, and so on. And what's the sector size, like the native physical sector size. And it's a nice thing to have, like kernel exposing more information to user space via the sys file system. Which has been growing. We haven't been looking at it that much in the update videos, but there are there are various interesting things here where the kernel sort of exposes its knowledge about the currently attached hardware. Very cool. Speaking of Liav, a change he did this month, which I particularly liked, was he removed this concept of supervisor memory pages. So we used to separate our memory pages, our physical memory used to be separated into supervisor memory and user memory. But Liav got rid of that this month. So now there's just memory. And we don't have a dedicated pool of memory reserved for sort of the supervisor purposes, but instead everybody can share all the memory. And I think it turned out really nice, and it's a nice simplification of our physical memory management system. So thank you, Liav, for working on that. And what else? I think, I know what I want to show you. This is something very special. So we have a bunch of port work every month, but this month there was a special port, which I think is really cool. And let me show it to you in a fun way. So this month we have a port of QEMU, which was spearheaded by Tim. So thank you very much, Tim, for doing all the work to get this up and running. And here I am booting a very early version of SerenityOS in QEMU in SerenityOS. And this is Serenity from, I think, December 2018. So pretty old by now. And this is what it looked like back then, which really takes me back because this is what I saw every day when I was working on it back then. We got some basic commands here. I think there's even a message of the day. Ooh, check that out. I was going for some cool ASCII art there. Copyright 2018. And I think there was even a PS command. No, maybe not. Or maybe I just have to type it. Yeah, backspace doesn't work. Yeah. Man, it was a simpler time, but look how far we've come. Now we are running this old thing that I was working on in an emulator in Serenity. Super cool. I love that. Let's see. Oh, got a little glitched out there. But I think that's super awesome. So thank you very much, Tim, for getting QEMU working. I know there was a lot of work that went into that. A lot of compatibility work across the board. And the system as a whole has benefited greatly from the QEMU port project. So it's awesome to see it up and working. And yeah. Ooh, one last thing before I forget. Let me show you, since I have a binary file here, these are the file system contents. I can open that with Hex Editor. And Carol this month did a little thing for Hex Editor, where null bytes, or bytes that have the value 0, they are gray here. So that sort of helps non-zero data stand out a bit better. So I guess it's easier to see it in a situation where it's like here. Yeah, so the non-zero data bytes stand out a little bit by being black while the zeros are gray. I don't know, it's a nice little touch. I really like it. So thank you, Carl, for doing that. So since our friend Linus is out traveling today, I'm just going to do a little browser update, and he'll be back next month, hopefully, with a bigger one. But some little things that I like this month. Here, for example, you can now middle click on bookmarks and it makes them open in a separate tab. I think that's pretty nifty. And it also works on the home button here. This was implemented by Network Exception. So thank you, Network Exception, for adding that. We've had a whole bunch of painting work by MacDo this month, who did progress bars, for example. So this is a HTML progress element styled with native style first, and then also with CSS. And this one is pretty pretty hardcore here. And I don't know, it's really cool to see more people picking up LibWeb and learning how it works and improving it to support more web content. MacDo has been doing a whole bunch of different work on web rendering, by the way, like also on gradients, which we now support in a whole bunch of places, and border radius I know he was working on as well, and probably more things. MacDo has been on a crusade to support border radius on all kinds of elements, which is really nice. I think this is a canvas element that now renders with a border radius. Very cool. Oh, what's going on here? Is that an iframe with a border radius? That's pretty cool. Look at that. Yeah, so big thanks to MacDo for doing all the work on that, improving our rendering fidelity. And another cool thing this month is that color schemes. I know Linus has a color scheme, so let's open Linus's website. So your system has this like dark or light colors theme. So it's supposed to take effect right away, although I feel like it was pre-selected there and it didn't take effect originally, but now at least when you switch, it takes effect right away, which previously you had to also like resize the page or something to force a relayout. But Luke made it so that when you change color scheme, it changes the page right away, which we appreciate. Thank you, Luke, for doing that. And then there's been a whole bunch of work on various APIs. Like I know Kenneth worked on the file API, on XML HTTP request, and added various functionality to that. I think Luke did. I think Luke added XML Serializer this month, I feel like. Let's see if we can make one. Yes, so serialize to string. Let's serialize Linus's website. No, that's not how you do that. Oh, it's not called X. Serialize to string. Yes, so we now have an XML serializer that you can use to serialize your favorite DOM. And I forget why we needed that. It was for some compatibility with some website, but it's nice of Luke to put together an XML serializer just for us. So thank you, Luke. And I myself have worked a lot on Flexbox this month to support websites like the new Reddit and Twitter and various others. And new Reddit is still not good, not great, but it is improving. Let's see if it loads here. Wow, it takes a hot minute. Okay, here we go. So yeah, at least it's starting to resemble itself. Previously, we've been limited to only using old Reddit, but now you can start to browse new Reddit. We do still have layout issues, of course, but the site is coming together a little bit, which is cool. On the JavaScript front, I wanted to mention that we are now at 69% pass rate on the Test 262 test suite for our bytecode interpreter. So slowly but surely, it's nicely catching up with our AST interpreter. And one of these days, we're gonna replace it. So thank you very much to Luke, who did a whole bunch of work on the bytecode interpreter this month. So that's all the stuff we had for you today. Thank you so much for checking in and staying up to date with the project. And thank you to my co-host, JT. Make sure you subscribe to their channel here on YouTube for more interesting content. If you want to come chat about any of the stuff we're working on, do join our Discord server. There's a link to that in the video description. I also have a weekly live stream here on YouTube. It's every Friday at 4 p.m. Swedish time. It's called SerenityOS Office Hours, and it's a Q&A format, so everybody is welcome to come and ask whatever they want to know about Serenity and related projects. Finally, if you would like to sponsor development of SerenityOS, you can find donation options for some of our developers in the video description below. I'm personally working on this full-time since May of 2021. Thanks to the very generous support of so many awesome people, I've been doing this full-time for over a year now, and it's just great. I love it, and I'm infinitely grateful for all of the support that I get. Thank you, seriously. Yeah, and that's it for today. So see you next time. Bye.